This presentation this presentation will be approximately 2 hours. So if you want to get a glass of water or any snacks, feel free to do so. But please make sure to put forward your full attention towards this, as this is very important. Thank you.
So we have an agenda today. First off, we will start with our introductions. Each KCS Youth Club officer will introduce themselves. Next, we will have our special guest speaker, Mr. Joshua Thomas, talk about his slides. Then we will get into racism and we'll cover what it is and how it exists, systemic racism, the history of policing in the US, gun violence, how racism exists within our community, and what we can do about it. Next, we'll go into implicit and unconscious bias and microaggression. We will be covering what it is and how it exists and how we can respond to it. Then we're going to cover some mental health, and then we will go over actions and priorities so we know what to commit. Finally, we'll end with a question and answer. So please hold your questions until after the presentation is over, as we have a section where we will be answering as many questions as we possibly can. So let's start off with our introductions. Hello, everyone. My name is Purnima Tommy. I am co-president of KCS Youth Club along with Ryan. I am a rising junior at Northwest High School, and I'm so glad that everyone was able to make it today and everyone is here for this very important presentation.
So, hello everyone. My name is Ryan Sainavid, and of course, I'm co-president with Purnima. I am a rising junior at Northwest High School, so I will be in 11th grade starting fall 2020, and I attend Northwest High School. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janu Manuel. I am a rising freshman at Loudoun County High School. I'm an event coordinator for KCS Youth, and I'm 14 years old. Thank you.
Hi, I am Gia Manuel. I'm a rising junior at Loudoun County High School. I am 15 years old, and I am the communications officer for KCS Youth.
Hi, my name is
At
Catherine.
Northwest High School, and I am the secretary.
Hi, my name is Catherine Tenney. I'm an event coordinator for KCS Youth. I'm a rising freshman at Poolsville High School, and I'm 14 years old.
Hi, I'm Varsha Chandran. I'm 16 years old, and I'm a rising junior at Marys Ridge High School, and I'm an event coordinator for KCS Youth.
Hello everyone, my name is Parvati Pulanchodan and I'm a rising junior at John Champ High School and I'm a KCS Youth Club officer.
Hi, my name is Suraj Shivam. I'm a 7th grader at Mount View Middle and I'm a secretary in the KCS Youth Club.
Hi everyone, my name is Shivani Kumar. I am a rising senior at John Champ High School and I am the vice president of the KCS Youth team.
Hello, I'm Kieran Nair, and I'm a rising freshman at Westfield High School, and I'm a club officer for the KCS Youth team.
Hi, I'm Ishan Funnickle, and I'm a rising freshman at Atherton High School, and I'm a club officer in the KCS Youth Club.
Hi, I am Roshan Malakra. I am an uprising freshman in Glenelg High School, and the communication officer in the KCS Youth Leagues.
Hi, I'm Hima Shelley. I'm a rising freshman at Damascus High School, and I'm a club officer for the KCS Youth team.
Hi, my name is Vishnu Menon. I'm an incoming freshman, and I'm a club officer for KCS Youth Club.
Hi, my name is Shiva Menon, and I'm a freshman, and I'm a youth club officer.
Hello, I'm Ashton Rajesh, and I'm a rising junior at Thomas Jefferson High School, and I'm also a youth club officer at KCS Youth.
All right, thank you for those introductions. Now, before we get started with our presentation, we would like to officially welcome Mr. Joshua Thomas to our seminar. Mr. Thomas is a member of the Prince George's County Board of Education and a director for Teach for America. His insight, opinion, and message is very valuable to us as we learn and take actions to eradicate racism in our community. Welcome, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you so much, Purnima, and thank you all for creating this space and inviting me to join here. I feel so grateful to have this opportunity to share my thoughts and insight. And I want to, really just take a time to acknowledge how important of a discussion this is. It's extremely critical that we as a community do take a close look at the issues that are at hand and take meaningful steps towards dismantling the systemic inequity that exists within our country. So I'm so grateful that I was invited to be a part of this discussion today. And I want to also just call out a few other things. First of all, you see that I'm joining from my phone. I just had a storm that passed over my house maybe about an hour ago, and it somehow knocked out my Wi-Fi. So I am joining from my phone, and I apologize because I did intend to join from my laptop. So I just ask for your grace there. And I also want to acknowledge that I am in the middle of the pandemic like everyone else. And so I do not look like what that slide shows me to be. This is definitely my quarantine hair and my quarantine beard. And so I just want to also just call that out and just ask for your all grace as I usually would. I like to present myself a little bit more nicely. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to share, and unfortunately I did not have any slides, but I'm just going to speak through them out loud. And the first thing is that in order to really engage in a conversation like this, we do have to actually establish some norms. There are some norms that we must all accept and choose to tap into, to lean into as we engage in this conversation in order for it to be meaningful for us. And so the first of those norms is I ask and invite everyone here to be fully present. It can be really difficult. We've been in a Zoom virtual world for now, a little more than 3 months. And I know just as well as anyone else how easy it can be to get distracted, to lose your attention and your focus. And so I invite folks that are engaging in this conversation to be fully present. But the other norms that I have to share and that I hope that we can all accept are even more critical. And one of them is that we have to experience discomfort in this conversation. And you can see on the slide here, we shouldn't be ignoring racism because it makes us uncomfortable. And we should be very aware that the topics that we discuss today are going to be uncomfortable at points. But in order for us to grow meaningfully, we have to experience this discomfort. And so I invite you all to put yourself in a difficult and vulnerable position to experience discomfort. And the last of these norms is to accept non-closure. What that means is that we are not going to get all of the answers from this conversation. We are not going to all be experts on this matter at the end of this seminar. But what we are going to do is grow together and learn together. And even if we don't end with a final answer or end with a clear path moving forward, that's okay. So I invite you to be fully present, to experience discomfort, and to accept non-closure during this seminar. Now, I want to just share a couple of other reflections as we enter into this space. And I see that as I'm looking through the participants on the call, it looks like everyone's video is off for the most part. So that's totally fine. But I would just maybe love to see in the chat, folks could respond to this. How many folks in our community think to yourself about the fact that as a community and individual experiences, you've been able to come to this country, you've been able to work hard, save money, potentially buy a home, send your kids to school. You could be anywhere along this path. You could be a student that's grown up here. And how for so many of our community members, they ask the question, well, we did it. Why can't everyone else do it? I would say nod your head or give me a thumbs up if you've ever felt yourself thinking that. But if you'd like, please put in the chat and say, yes, this is something that I've asked myself. How come, well, we did it? How come other communities can't do it in the same way? Yeah, thanks for that thumbs up. You might, a lot of folks wonder that. I know my parents have asked those kinds of questions. I know my uncles and aunts have asked those kinds of questions. How come our community was able to come and establish ourselves and work really hard and create great opportunities for our families? How come others can't do it? Well, it's important for us to think about. Yeah, thanks Dilip for mentioning that. Let's actually think about how we got here. And I think about my mom and dad. Many of you know me and have known me since I was a kid. So you know my dad, Dr. T, and my mom, Nancy. And so I think about how my parents came to this country. Well, they got married in 1983, and they made a choice together that they were going to immigrate to the United States. They were actively deciding to do this, like many of you on this call. You made an active decision to do it. And in coming here, you didn't have it all easy. You didn't immediately have it all set up for you. You had to come, you had to be intentional, you had to work hard, but you probably had one or two family members or friends who was able to help you get settled in. Maybe you had a place where you were able to lay your head and keep your belongings for a period of time. Maybe you had a sponsor and you were able to have time to gain your footing, but you also came here intentionally and knowing what you wanted to accomplish with your time here. My parents did. My parents knew that they wanted to start a family, that they wanted to enter the industries that they were both aspiring to work in. They wanted to work really hard, save money, send their kids to college. This is what my parents knew that they wanted when they came here. But in today's conversation, we are discussing the systemic inequity that exists in our country, specifically as it relates to the Black community. And here's something that our community doesn't think about or doesn't recognize a lot. In the same way I just asked, how did we get here, right? How did my family get here? Let's ask, how did the majority of the Black community get to this point in time? Friends, we have to remember that while we made an active choice to come to this country, the majority of our Black brothers and sisters did not have to get to make that choice for themselves. It's began in the 1400s and 1500s, which was the transatlantic slave trade. And to put it quite simply, European men landed on the shores of Western Africa, and they forced people into captivity by using guns and weapons. Now, folks know that slavery is something that existed in this country for a few hundred years, and then it ended, and now we don't have slavery anymore. But it's important to remember, it's important to acknowledge what all really happened. Think about it. These were folks who were forced into captivity, forced onto ships. Many of them did not even survive the ship, the travel to come to the Americas. But even when they got here, people often think about how slavery took away people's personal freedom. But it took away so much more than that. When these individuals were enslaved, they were stripped of not only their freedom, they were stripped of their name, of their culture, of their religion. They were usually separated from their family members. And so when I think about my parents and their experience in coming to this country, they made a choice to come here. They had a family and a community who supported that. However, there were literally hundreds of thousands of people who were stripped of their names, changed into some slave owner's name. They were stripped of their religion and their faith. They were stripped of their culture. They were stripped of their identities. And so when we think about what has gone on, we have to remember that these were people who had to reestablish themselves in a new world with a completely different culture and a completely different identity than who they originally were. This went on for several hundreds of years. And so think about a coworker or a friend who you have who's Black. They may have a name that sounds like what we would think is an American name. Not at all like our unique Malayali names where we can read a name and know, oh, that person's from India, that person's from South India. Think about most of the African-American folks you know. the reality of it is they were stripped of their names and they were given names that belonged to slave owners and the people who ultimately established this inequitable system. Well, this went on for hundreds of years until the mid 1800s, where we all know about the Emancipation Proclamation and the work that was done by legislators to ultimately end slavery, abolish slavery in our country. But again, let's remember, that didn't mean that everything ended and we started at ground zero. The folks who were released from bondage and released from slavery were not given some kind of reparations. They weren't given a big piece of land. They weren't given, they weren't all of a sudden put into the best schools so their kids could get a great education. No, that wasn't what happened at all. As a matter of fact, they were forced to fend for themselves. So now they were free in a land that they were forced onto. They were given names that did not belong to them originally, and a religion and a faith that did not belong to them. But now they were free, and they were expected to figure it out on their own. Figure it out. And folks say, well, why weren't they given a fair start? Well, just like we see today in 2020, people in power felt threatened. They didn't want to lose their wealth. They didn't want to lose their position of power in controlling this country. So instead of making it an even playing field, they said, all right, we'll end slavery, but figure it out. Even still, for over 100 years after slavery ended, segregation still existed. Black kids went to the black people's school. White kids could go to the white people's school. Black people used the black people restrooms. White people used the white people restrooms. This went on for over 100 years. And so even though slavery ended in the mid 1800s, a new era of segregation that still kept communities of color down existed. And so then people say, well, okay, but then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, segregation slowly ended, the country became integrated, and so it's all good, right? Well, it's not all good. Again, there was never a point where people were given an even start, where people were now made to be on the same playing field. So when we think about our own experience, we chose to come here with our names, with our faith, with our culture, with our beliefs. We had our family. We knew where we came from. But for the folks here in the African American community, many of them did not and never will be able to. Their history has been reduced to the era of slavery. Their name has been changed and given to them that is not a name that they originally had. And so when we think about then in the 60s, this Civil Rights Act passed, there were still so many ways in which communities of color, specifically the Black community, was kept down. Once schools started getting integrated, we had what was called white flight, where white folks moved away from these new integrated areas. They didn't want their kids to go to school with the Black kids. And we still find ourselves in this exact same predicament now in 2020. And so when you're asking yourself and you're thinking to yourself, well, we did it. How come they can't do it? How come they're not able to do it in the same way? Think about the history that is behind this. Imagine if you were born in a country and in a time where you were automatically born into poverty and you already did not have an even playing field alongside others. We had a choice to come to this country, and we have, most of our community has thrived and really lived what we believe in the American dream. But that dream is not afforded to everyone in this country and has not been given to the majority of the Black community that was forced here hundreds of years ago. And so when you think about that, we have to start there, because once we acknowledge that this is not an equal country, this is not a place that anyone can come and succeed as we've been told and as we've thought. It's not the case. We had it a little bit differently than many other oppressed communities in this country. We made a choice to come here. And so as you're engaging in this conversation and as you're thinking about the different topics that are going to be discussed in this seminar, remember that we made a choice to come to this country. But for the community who we're talking about, the Black community, they did not. And so we had to then unlearn a lot of the mindsets that have been drilled into our brain. We have to now acknowledge that this moment in time doesn't begin a month ago or 2 months ago when the protests started. It doesn't begin 7-8 years ago when Trayvon Martin was killed. It doesn't begin in the 90s during the Rodney King riots. It doesn't begin in 1964 during the civil rights era. It doesn't begin in 1863 during the Emancipation Proclamation. This is rooted hundreds of years ago in the history and the fabric of this country. And we have to acknowledge that that's where we're beginning. That's where this all is rooted in. And we have to acknowledge that our privilege in being able to have the choice to come here gave us different opportunities for how we were able to thrive in this country. So I know I've talked for quite a bit now. I'm sorry that I did not have any slides, and I'm sorry that I had to talk from my phone, but I hope that this grounded us in where we should be having this conversation from. And so I invite you all to continue to be fully present, experience discomfort, accept non-closure, and be ready to fully engage in this conversation in the seminar today. Thank you so much to the KCS Youth for putting together this event, and I look forward to continuing to be a part of this. Thank you very much.
So before we start this video, thank you so much, Mr. Thomas, for your insight. And we would be honored if you could stay for the presentation and answer any questions our audience may have at the end of the presentation. Once again, we truly appreciate you being here with us this evening. And now this is a quick video about unconscious bias and how it can affect humanity.
Hi, Mom, it's me. I got in trouble again at school today.
Hi, this is Miss Jones again. I'm finding your son very disruptive in class, more so than other students.
I feel like the teacher doesn't like me. Other kids do bad things, but they don't get in trouble.
He's defiant and shows a real lack of respect for any structure or authority.
I hate school because the teachers are always mean to me and I don't feel like I'm learning anything.
I'm really concerned about his behavior.
I'm always getting in trouble for what I didn't do.
We're going to have to adopt a zero-tolerance policy, young man.
School keeps calling my mother, and she gets really, really mad at me.
What is going on? You'd better explain.
I feel like the whole world is just turned up against me and doesn't like me anymore. There are days I get up and I just decide I'm not going to school.
And we go to the park, like everybody's always telling me I'm not worth anything, so what's the point of trying?
I know the cops are watching us, but we just hope we don't get caught.
Your son's absences are a problem. They will definitely affect his grade point average.
I don't feel safe in my class anymore.
Should I assume you're unprepared again today?
I would always eventually get picked on by the teacher. He makes examples of me.
I feel really singled out, and I just try to avoid people because every time I look, somebody's always talking about me. Oh, she's always getting in trouble.
But I started fighting more because nobody wants to hang out around a troublemaker. The only time I have real friends is when I'm on the block. So that's where I'll stay.
I'm sure you understand we take our discipline policies very seriously here at the school. What are we going to do about your son?
So as you can see from that video, racism can exist almost anywhere. Well, you may ask, what is racism and how does it exist? Racism is prejudice, discrimination directed against a person based on their ethnicity, their background, their racial background, or even their color. racism as a public health crisis. And you can see in the list, states such as California, Michigan, Ohio, and much more are declaring racism a public health crisis because of the growing large numbers of racial encounters between police brutality and African Americans. Thank you. Next slide.
Before we continue, I just want to remind everyone we will be having a question and answer at the end of our presentation, so please hold your questions until then. So, you've probably heard of hashtag BLM and may be wondering what it is. Hashtag BLM, or Black Lives Matter, is an international activist movement calling out violence, injustice, and systemic racism against Black people. Hashtag Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder, and have since then been helping cases such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. They help bring justice to families who have been victims of racial oppression and inequality, and advocate for reform and justice in our system. This may cause you to think, what about all lives matter? Isn't my life just as important? All lives do matter. However, Black lives are currently in more danger than others, and hashtag BLM brings attention to that issue. Think of it this way. Saying all lives matter is equivalent to saying all houses matter when someone else's house is clearly on fire and in need. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, systemic racism is a current issue which the movement is trying to tackle. Some people may not understand it or may have some misunderstandings on what systemic racism is. Systemic racism is when a system is oppressive or targets a specific group of people in a negative way. This means the system favors and allows another group of people to get more opportunities to succeed and more privilege. Examples of this include the American justice system, wealth gaps, education gaps, mortality rates, and more. Just to understand what systemic racism is, let's watch a couple of these videos, starting with wealth gap.
Did you know that in 2010, Black Americans made up 13% of the population, but only had 2.7% of the country's wealth? That the median net worth for a white family was $134,000, but the median net worth for a Hispanic family was $14,000, and for Black Americans, it was $11,000? Know that the median wealth for a single white woman has been measured at $41,000, but for a Hispanic woman, it was $140. And for a Black woman, $120? Did you know that? Do you know what that's called? That's called systemic racism. And yes, it's really a know that year in and year out for the last 60 years, no matter what else is going on in America, Black unemployment has been about twice white unemployment. That even if you just look at Black college graduates, their unemployment rate is always twice that of white college graduates. And even if all you do is apply for a job with a white sounding name, you're 50% more likely to get a call back than if you have a Black sounding name. Did you know that? Do you know what that's called? That's called systemic racism. And yes, it's really a thing. Ever wondered why, even though undocumented people come to the United States from all over the world, the face of undocumented people is always assumed to be Central American or South American, and why our heavy-handed immigration policies that tear lives apart and ruin families every day are focused almost entirely on the southern U.S. border and the Hispanic people of color that come across that border? Have you ever wondered why that is? Well, that's because of systemic racism. And yes, it's really a thing.
So those were some videos. You can watch the rest of them on your own to learn more about the different types of systemic racism and how it affects the Black community and other people of color. So now let's move on to these statistics. These statistics show how racism exists every day, and especially in law enforcement. As you can see, Black people have a higher chance of being killed by police, as they are 3 times more likely to be killed compared to white people. This is alarming because they take up 12% of the US population, but take up 26.4% of all people killed by police. One might argue that this is due to crime rates. However, these killing rates don't correlate to crime rates, as Graph 3 shows how crime rates are not related to the amount of people killed by police. This shows how people are being killed not because of crime, but because of brutality. Next slide, please.
So with the Black Lives Matter hashtag, you may have heard of another one, especially after George Floyd. It's hashtag say his name, her name, or hashtag say their names. So what's the importance of even saying their names? Well, it reminds us that they were just elementary, middle, maybe high school kids, maybe a dad, a mom, a brother, a sister, that they're people just like you, me, or our family and friends. Tamir Rice was only 12 years old. He was playing in a park with his airsoft gun. Trayvon Martin, he was only 17 years old. He was walking at night. Eric Garner, 27 years old, sitting down in front of a store. Breonna Taylor was an emergency medical technician and a paramedic. And Ahmaud Arbery was just jogging in his neighborhood. All of them were killed for looking suspicious or just fitting the description of a black male. Their lives are gone, and their families' lives have been changed forever, and Black citizens are still living in fear for their lives. Next slide.
All of these individuals were a result of police brutality. A big reason that the police have been a huge factor of the growing unfair treatment of Black citizens is because of the way our police system works. Historically, in the 1700s and 1800s, criminal activities prospered and the police system was not very well established. Citizens were expected to follow the system of hue and cry. It was a system where individuals were to drop any task at hand and try to intimidate or capture the person who was committing a crime. The system was not at all effective and was quickly outdated. Since it was not productive, the communities made their own versions of the police. The North and South had very different policing styles. In the North, it was mainly about protecting the community and the people, while in the South, it was mainly about tracking runaway slaves and keeping them under the South's jurisdiction. The system of the police force spread from the South to the North. It was known that the officer's loyalty often settled with the sheriff of the department rather than the law itself. The first police force was officially made in 1838 in Boston and was soon followed by major cities such as New York and Chicago. In the 1900s, August Vollmer, known as the father of modern policing, made a different system for juveniles and stressed the importance of education in their officers. In 1960, citizens decided to fight back against the unfair law enforcement, which led to the civil rights movement. In the 1990s, they changed the way they policed minority neighborhoods altogether. The police forces had the minority individuals who lived in these neighborhoods police them as well. This helped lower crime rates immensely. This is similar to the successful Jena Maitri policing method, which has been implemented in Kerala over a decade ago. After 9/11, police departments focused on counterterrorism. In 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed by a police officer for looking suspicious. And this sparked the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013. In 2015, a classified FBI policy guide stated that white supremacist extremists have often identified to have active links to law enforcement officers. Jumping to the near present, in 2019, last year, over 1,000 people were shot and killed by the police. By this time, the FBI had started a database in which they asked police departments all across the nation to report the police crimes being committed. Only 40% of the departments had participated. According to the Washington Post database of fatal police shootings, in the last 5 years, there has been over 5,000 fatal shootings, with the majority of the victims being Black Americans being killed twice the amount as white Americans. Just last week, President Trump passed an executive order saying that all officers must report their crimes to the government. Thank you. Next slide.
Gun violence. Gun violence occurs daily, but it is a topic that people don't talk about. Between the years of 2014 and 2017, gun violence has increased by 16%. Statistically, Black men are more likely to be killed by guns than white men, and the same applies for women. Unarmed Black civilians are nearly 5 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than unarmed white civilians. Gun violence can also be impacting socially. It can be seen in areas of low income and also schools like Parkland and Columbine. In school shootings, specifically Columbine, the shooters shot people because of their race. They were taunted and ridiculed and even called offensive names before being shot. The violence seen in low-income communities might be very well known, but it is only briefly mentioned in newscasts. Media outlets perpetuate stereotypes of communities of color by rarely showing minorities in the role of victim. This portrayal shows the myth of gun violence starting because of Black-on-Black violence, which is not true at all. In fact, most gun violence crimes occur between people of the same race, white on white, Hispanic on Hispanic, and etc., due to the ways our communities are still segregated. The narrative of Black on Black crime is rooted in systemic oppression, racism, and implicit bias, which you will learn later on in the presentation, and it leaves Black people and other minorities to fix their problems on their own. Next slide.
So let's talk about racism in our community. Although it's not discussed much, racism is actually very deeply rooted in the people of Indian origin. Indians have an ideology of perfect skin as being fair and believe that darker skin was unwanted. There is also a common belief that Black people are lazier or less intelligent, along with the belief that Black people are criminals. These ideas have been passed down in the Indian community throughout many generations and still affect us today. For example, in jobs, people with lighter skin are more likely to be hired over their dark-skinned peers, even if they have the same skill sets and accomplishments. Even if we know that these ideas are not true, we can end up believing them without realizing, causing us to have an unconscious bias against Black people, which causes us to possibly convey these false ideas on others. Next slide, please.
So how can we help? One way is to go to the protests. However, many people are scared as there is a global pandemic going around. So there are many other ways that you can help from your very own home. We can text the following numbers, the following messages, and it'll help by showing how many people are with the movement. You can also sign petitions like the Georgia Hate Crime Bill petition, which demands House Bill 426, which is currently stalled in Senate, to be passed and enacted. And you can also sign the Defund the Police petition, which is a call to end systemic racism through the defunding of police and the reallocation of funds to Black communities and resources. You can also send a message to Congress or your representatives to support criminal justice reform, allocation of taxpayer funds towards community services, and call for civilian oversight of police. You can also donate to organizations that have been approved by the Black Lives Matter movement itself. All of these ways are only some of the ways that you can help. We, as the KCS Youth Club, encourage you to research other ways to support the movement in order to make sure that justice is achieved.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Now, after watching the video, let me give you a proper definition about what implicit or unconscious bias is. Unconscious bias are cliches that people unknowingly give to another person or group that affect how they interact with them. Some examples of this include the age bias or ageism. So a lot of the times in your household, if your phone isn't working or your laptop isn't working, you often ask someone younger to fix it as opposed to someone older. Then there's also confirmation bias. This is when you only look for facts to support a decision you've made and you ignore anything that opposes it. And lastly, there's a type of unconscious bias which is especially prevalent in today's society, known as the horn or halo effect. This is when you're judged based on one event or one thing you do. So if you do something good, you're perceived positively, and that's known as the halo effect. And if you do something bad, you're perceived negatively, and that's known as the horn effect. This connects to how unconscious bias exists in our community, because if a Black person commits a crime once, many people believe that all Black people are criminals. This, of course, is not okay because one person's actions should not affect how you look at a whole racial group. Next slide.
There are some phrases in many cultures and languages that represent unconscious bias towards a specific group of people. Examples of unconscious Malayalam bias phrases are Karmamaരുടെ കൂടെ കൂട്ടുകൂടരുത്, കർമ്മമാരെ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കണം, കർമ്മമാരുടെ സ്വഭാവം കണ്ടുപഠിക്കേണ്ട, or ആ gift എടുക്കേണ്ട, അതിന്റെ പുറത്ത് ഒരു Black person picture ആണ്. And examples of unconscious Hindi bias phrases are wo kala hai or kala logon se dur raho. These are some common Desi bias phrases within the community due to the belief of the color white being superior or considered more attractive in comparison to the color Black. Within the Desi community itself, there's a great deal of discrimination with the primary establishment of the caste system. Then there is the geographical misunderstanding in which the North Indians refer to the South Indians as Madrasis for their dark skin color, and then the unnecessary economic benefit of selling skin whitening products such as Fair and Lovely and other fairness creams. These cultural bias behaviors are what individuals carry to foreign countries and influence their fellow peers and individuals in the similar way. Our world has evolved from the past, but we still have a very long way to go. By participating in protests, signing petitions, and helping fight against racism, people can help bring change to their community. For example, within the Desi community, the consumer goods group Unilever claims that the name of the skin lightening cosmetic Fair and Lovely will change, and the term skin whitening will no longer be marketed. However, they will still continue to sell this product in the market. Although this is not enough, it is still a step in the right direction. We must continue on this path to help eliminate the unconscious bias we all hold within our minds. Next slide, please. Now let's watch a video created by a Malayali blogger about the different racial stereotypes within the Malayali and Indian community experienced in America.
ഒരു കാര്യം പറയാതിരിക്കാൻ നിർവാഹമില്ല. ഞാൻ കണ്ടിട്ടുള്ളതിൽ വെച്ച് ഏറ്റവും വലിയ റേസിസ്റ്റുകൾ നമ്മൾ മലയാളികൾ തന്നെയാണ് എന്ന് പറയേണ്ടി വരും. ഇവിടുത്തെ ആഫ്രിക്കൻ അമേരിക്കൻസിനോടുള്ള നമ്മുടെ മനോഭാവം തന്നെയാണ് അതിന് ഒരു ഉത്തമ ഉദാഹരണം. ഇവിടുത്തെ മലയാളികളുടെ രണ്ടാം തലമുറ പല വിഭാഗക്കാരിൽ നിന്ന് വിവാഹം കഴിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആഫ്രിക്കൻ അമേരിക്കൻസിനെ വിവാഹം കഴിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള കപ്പിൾസിന് നമ്മുടെ മലയാളി കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിൽ നിന്ന് നേരിടേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടുള്ള വിവേചനത്തിൻ്റെ കഥകൾ ധാരാളം കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്, വായിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ വെളുത്ത വർഗ്ഗക്കാരെ വിവാഹം ചെയ്യുന്ന മലയാളികളുടെ രണ്ടാം തലമുറയ്ക്ക് അത്തരം വിവേചനങ്ങൾ ഏൽക്കേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടില്ല എന്നുള്ളതാണ് വാസ്തവം. ഇവിടുത്തെ ചില മലയാളികളുമായി സംസാരിച്ച് കഴിയുമ്പോൾ ഇവരെ സായിപ്പായി ജനിപ്പിക്കാതിരുന്നതിന് ദൈവത്തിനോട് നന്ദി പറയേണ്ടി വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. കാരണം ഇവരെങ്ങാനും സായിപ്പായി ജനിച്ചിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ ഹിറ്റ്ലറിനേക്കാൾ ഏറ്റവും വലിയ റേസിസ്റ്റുകളായി അവർ മാറിയേനെ എന്ന് തോന്നിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. എൻ്റെ ഒരു പേഴ്സണൽ അനുഭവം ഇവിടെ പറയാതിരിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല. എൻ്റെ ഒരു സൂപ്പർവൈസർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ഒരു ആഫ്രിക്കൻ അമേരിക്കൻ, നല്ല വിദ്യാഭ്യാസമുള്ള നല്ല ഒരു മാനേജർ. ഭാരതത്തെപ്പറ്റിയും ഗാന്ധിജിയെപ്പറ്റിയുമൊക്കെ വളരെ നല്ല അഭിപ്രായമുള്ള ആൾ. ഗോഡ്സ് ഓൺ കൺട്രിയെപ്പറ്റി ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു കൊടുത്തിട്ടുള്ള അനുഭവങ്ങൾ വെച്ച് അവിടെ വിസിറ്റ് ചെയ്യണം എന്ന് വളരെ ആഗ്രഹമുള്ള ഒരു ആളായിരുന്നു. അങ്ങനെ ആയിരിക്കെ ഒരു ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഒന്നിച്ച് ഒരു ബിസിനസ് ആവശ്യത്തിന് വേണ്ടി അദ്ദേഹം ഇന്ത്യ സന്ദർശിച്ചു. നോർത്ത് ഇന്ത്യയിലെത്തി, പിന്നീട് നമ്മുടെ കൊച്ചിയിലുമെത്തി. അവിടെ നിന്ന് തിരിച്ചെത്തിയതിന് ശേഷം അദ്ദേഹം പറഞ്ഞ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ എൻ്റെ മനസ്സിൽ നിന്ന് ഒരിക്കലും മായില്ല. വെളുത്ത വർഗ്ഗക്കാരോടും കറുത്ത വർഗ്ഗക്കാരോടും വളരെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായ അനുഭവമാണ് നമുക്കുള്ളത്. അദ്ദേഹം ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽ നിന്ന് വിട്ട് ഒറ്റയ്ക്ക് നമ്മുടെ ഓട്ടോയിലൊക്കെ കയറി സഞ്ചരിച്ച സമയത്ത് അവർ വിളിച്ച ചില പേരുകൾ അദ്ദേഹത്തെ വളരെയധികം ഹർട്ട് ചെയ്തു. ബാഗിനകത്ത് എന്താണ്, കഞ്ചാവാണോ എന്നൊക്കെ ചോദിച്ച ഓട്ടോ ഡ്രൈവർമാരുണ്ട്. പലരും റെസ്റ്റോറൻറ്റിലൊക്കെ അദ്ദേഹം കഴിക്കാൻ കയറിയ സമയത്ത് തൊട്ടടുത്തിരുന്നവർ എഴുന്നേറ്റ് പോയി എന്നുള്ള അനുഭവം പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതേസമയം അവിടെ വരുന്ന വെളുത്ത വർഗ്ഗക്കാരോട് വളരെ ബഹുമാനത്തോടു കൂടിയാണ് നമ്മുടെ മലയാളികൾ പെരുമാറിയിരുന്നത്. ഇനി ഒരിക്കലും താൻ ഇന്ത്യയിലേക്ക്, പ്രത്യേകിച്ചും കേരളത്തിലേക്ക് തിരിച്ചു പോകില്ല എന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹം എന്നോട് പറഞ്ഞത്. ഇന്ത്യയിലെ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റികളിൽ പഠിക്കാൻ വരുന്ന കറുത്ത വർഗ്ഗക്കാരായിട്ടുള്ള ധാരാളം വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളുണ്ട്. വളരെ വലിയ റേസിസമാണ് അവർ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ നേരിടുന്നത് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. ധാരാളം പേരുടെ അനുഭവങ്ങൾ വായിച്ചിട്ടുമുണ്ട്. കോളേജ് ഹോസ്റ്റലുകളിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വെളിയിൽ മുറി കൊടുക്കുന്നതിന് പലരും തയ്യാറാകാതിരിക്കുക, തങ്ങളുടെ കോളേജ് സുഹൃത്തുക്കളിൽ നിന്ന് അവർക്ക് നേരിടേണ്ടി വരുന്ന ചില കുത്തുവാക്കുകൾ, ആ വാക്കുകളൊക്കെ ഇവിടെ കോടതിയിൽ കയറേണ്ട വാക്കുകളാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇന്നും ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. നമ്മൾ പൊതുവെ പറയുന്ന ഒരു കംപ്ലൈൻ്റ് ഉണ്ട്, നമ്മുടെ യുവാക്കൾ അമേരിക്കയിൽ നടക്കുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ അനുകരിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത്. ഇത്തരം വിവേചനങ്ങൾക്കെതിരെ അമേരിക്കയിൽ നടക്കുന്ന സമരങ്ങൾ വളരെ നല്ല പ്രതീക്ഷ നൽകുന്ന ഒന്നാണ്.
Not only adults have unconscious biases, kids and teens also have unconscious biases too. Here are some ways that kids and teens can tackle unconscious biases. Increase your contact with the relevant groups. Having contact with the people towards whom you have a bias with and learning more information about them can help you reduce your bias and replace it with new information. Counter the stereotypes. Your biases exist because your brain formed a link with stereotypes, so it's logical enough to believe that you can train your brain to form new positive associations. Be conscious of your behavior. Try to evaluate your behavior and take every opportunity to ask yourself whether bias played a part in your decisions. Structure your decision making. Plan out the criteria you'll use to make your decision and then apply those criteria and give evidence to yourself why you made your final decision. The more structure you can inject, the harder it'll be for you to act on misguided instincts. Thank you.
Many of you have probably heard someone say some phrases that they don't think come across as racist, but can often come across as it without the person even intending to do so. With the information you have gotten about racism and unconscious bias so far, it's important that you apply it to correct or educate someone in a reasonable way so that they can be conscious of what they say moving forward. First, when someone says all lives matter, you can respond in a way where you acknowledge where they are coming from, but you should understand that in this situation, we are advocating for the rights of Black people so that we are not ignorant of the systemic injustices that the Black community is facing currently and has been facing in America as early as 1619. You can bring up the analogy that Purnima said earlier, that all lives matter is like saying that all houses matter when one is clearly on fire, to help others visualize the importance of this movement. The fight for equality has been present for centuries, and in order to make more progress in this ongoing movement, we need to help out those who are the most marginalized first. After all, we have Black leaders to thank for all of us being able to settle in the United States with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that abolished the race-based immigration quota system. When someone says, "I don't see color, we are all one human race," this is a similar belief to the All Lives Matter statement. We can correct someone in this mentality by saying that although we are all part of one human race, we should be aware of the discrimination and oppression that the Black people face daily, just for the color of their skin, so we can help as much as we can in combating racism. When someone says, "Black people commit more crime," we should first help others get off the stigma that Black people tend to commit more crime, because the statistics that we mentioned earlier stated that police violence and crime rates towards Black people aren't correlated. It is also seen that there's more police presence in Black-dominated neighborhoods than in white-dominated neighborhoods. So Black crimes are bound to be more documented, monitored, and talked about compared to crimes in white-dominated neighborhoods. And when someone says, "Why do you make everything about race?" Well, the reason why race is so important in a time like this is because with the white supremacy embedded in our system, Black people have been regarded as not ideal for centuries. Many of us don't realize the privilege we have compared to Black people who live in fear when they are doing things in their everyday lives. A suggestion in order to be more aware of your privilege is to take notice of the oppression you may not have experienced or seen in your life through books, movies, podcasts, and more, so we can sympathize with the Black people fighting against the many systemic injustices present.
I would like to add on to the phrases Shivani mentioned that are often heard when discussing racism. We must respond to such phrases to educate those who may have an unconscious bias. So, when someone says, if they just follow the law, they'd be fine. When you hear this, respond by saying that many innocent lives have been taken for just fitting the description as a Black person. Recent famous example is of Amy Cooper, a white female who called the police when a Black male asked her to leash her dog at a park, as the law says so. Also, when someone comments by saying, "Do you think something I said was racist?" No, you must have understood me. When you hear that, respond by saying that racist acts are defined by their impact, not by their intent, which means it is based on how such a comment can deeply affect the person hearing it. And when a person simply states they're not a racist person, you should remind them by saying that racism is oftentimes subconscious, and they can confront their internalized biases by learning more about the denial of individual racism, by which Roshan will discuss as a part of microaggressions.
Thanks, Karen. Microaggressions and racism is often subconscious, undetected, or born out of privilege or apathy. Let's take a closer look at microaggressions. What are they? Microaggressions are common verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities. For example, it's when we hold our valuables more tightly when walking past a Black person, or when someone asks a person who looks Asian or Latino American, "Where are you really from?" implying that the person is not American. Though we may not see the effects immediately, microaggressions can actually affect people on both a physical and mental level. It can weaken self-confidence and self-image. It can sometimes even lead to mental health problems such as anxiety or depression. According to a study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, racial discrimination can increase aging at a cellular level. This causes younger African Americans to get diseases that are normally acquired at older ages. Next slide.
To summarize unconscious bias, let's look at this pyramid that differentiates overt and covert biases. The examples listed on the top of the pyramid are both well-known and displayed openly. They are the overt forms of racism that are not socially acceptable. This includes lynching, using the N-word, or the use of swastikas. On the other hand, the items on the bottom of the pyramid are examples of microaggressions or covert forms of racism that are socially acceptable. Examples of these actions include blaming the victim, calling the police on Black people, white silence, or not believing the experiences of Black people. We already covered the mostly used assumptions in the bottom of the pyramid, such as all lives matter, colorblindness, and denial of racism. All of the examples on this pyramid can have lasting effects on a person of color and should not be able to be done under the acceptance of society. In the next slide, let's take a look at how implicit bias can keep structural racism intact.
This image shows how implicit bias or unconscious bias leads to structural racism, which leads back to implicit bias. It is a cycle that feeds into each other. The text on this slide is very self-explanatory, so I would like to read a section of it to you. Racial classes were created to justify enslaving people from Africa. Policies and practices that consolidate and protect power bestow unearned economic, social, cultural, and political advantage to people called white, and unearned disadvantage to people of color. National narrative about people of color being less than human or less than white justifies this mistreatment and inequality. Next, we will watch a video that gives us a reason for why we have unconscious bias. So get ready to follow along on a visualization exercise.
Let's start with a brain exercise. I'm going to ask you to visualize 3 scenarios. The visualization part is very important, so please close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine you're late to catch a flight. You rush through the airport, you make it through security, you run to the gate, you make it down the jetway, you step on the plane just as they close the door behind you, and the pilot steps out of the cockpit to say hi. You get to your destination, you go to a local restaurant, and you have the best meal of your life. I mean, really enjoy this. There's no calories in visualization. And at the table next to you is a couple happily celebrating their anniversary. The next morning, you go to the biggest technology conference in the world, and the CEO of this year's hottest tech startup just took the stage to speak. Now you should have a solid picture of all of that. So open your eyes, because I have some questions for you. In your mental image, was the pilot black? Was the married couple 2 men? Did the tech CEO on stage look like me? It's okay if one or all of your answers is no. Your brain creates images of what's familiar. It's less of a fan of what's not familiar. The things I mentioned are generally less familiar. The black pilot, the same-sex married couple, the female tech CEO. No matter how much you might love the idea of those things, when immediately confronted with them, the amygdala, that's the most ancient part of your brain, signals the hypothalamus to fire up the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is where the brain and the endocrine system intersect. So at this point, your adrenal glands release cortisol into your bloodstream, which triggers your stress response. This is the physiology of stress, according to the Dartmouth Undergraduate Journal of Science, and it happens in a matter of milliseconds, long before you have the chance to consciously think, I'm so happy these 2 men have the freedom to marry who they love. As Dr. Susan Fisk explains, when it comes to unfamiliar social situations, there's ample evidence that encountering something fundamentally different from what we expect elicits a stronger activation in the amygdala than encountering something or someone we perceive as the norm. This is what kept our species alive for millions of years. This instantaneous instinctive response triggers fight or flight, which is what kept us from being eaten by saber-toothed tigers or killed by a member of a foreign tribe. But in modern society, our brains still do this. When we encounter the unexpected, our heart races slightly, our blood pressure goes up, we sweat a little, and for no discernible reason, we just feel stressed out.
The video we just watched show how we get stressed. Numerous studies show that there are harmful and long-term effects on mental health due to racism. For people of color, racism can lead to anxiety, depression, and even trauma. Racial trauma is caused by frequent experiences of racism, combined with similar trauma passed down from generation to generation. also known as intergenerational racism. One experience of racism may not cause much damage, but when repeated, it can cause trauma. Racial trauma can also affect children in many ways, including their IQ, ability to regulate emotions, and trouble feeling safe or protected. In a study published by the American Psychological Association in 2018, researchers found that babies as young as 6 months old can sense racial and ethnic differences. Preschoolers are able to group themselves by race, and by the age of 10, kids can start recognizing obvious and even tiny signs of racial discrimination. Racism may be eradicated sooner if we focus on mental health along with removing personal biases. KCS Youth is planning another seminar during summer and before school starts in fall about practicing good mental hygiene. Follow us on Instagram at kcs.youth.club for updates.
Let's talk about some priorities that we can work on immediately. The statements that you see on the left are actions that we can take right now in order to help the Black Lives Matter movement. First is to take an IAT or implicit association test that helps to reveal an implicit or indirect attitude that you did not know about. The IAT measures the degree of association you may have with a certain group of people and stereotypes or evaluations related to them. For example, an IAT test might be about disabilities and would ask you questions about how you feel about certain disabilities or disabled people, or your opinion on a stereotype related to disabled people. Next and foremost, educating yourself and talking to others about racism is a great way to better understand it and deal with it. Google is always a good place to start, but please be mindful of confirmation bias. As you know, we have the general election coming up in November that will elect our next president through 2024. As a step towards solving racial disparities, research and discuss about African American candidates with your parents and siblings who are eligible to vote, and encourage them to vote for Black candidates who support the Black Lives Matter movement. In general, we should try to increase the number of voters among young adults, especially Gen Z. On a personal level, we can help spread the message of Black Lives Matter through seminars or simply by telling other people. You can even spread awareness by changing a profile pic on social media to the Black Lives Matter logo. We should all try to get rid of our negative bias towards the African American community. Social media is definitely a powerful medium, so use it wisely.
Thank you, Vishnu, for discussing our priorities for immediate action. Ashwin will be discussing a timeline and milestones shortly. In the meantime, let's look at what we can do for the long term. The statements you see on the screen are actions that we can commit to for the long term. So first off, let's make an effort to get to know Black friends and their families. As you heard in the video earlier, let's get to know each other before we decide to like or not like someone. A few of the immediate actions Vishnu mentioned can also fall under a long-term commitment. So even after BLM stops trending, let's continue educating ourselves, understanding our biases, and finding ways to change them. Remember that Black, Native, and Latin American people are highly marginalized. After the lockdown is lifted, let us try to attend events that support these causes in a more hands-on way. Do you still remember that video earlier that asked you to participate in a visualization exercise? She also gave solutions on what we can do to change our biases, and the main idea is to consciously turn the unexpected into the expected. As you go about your day, visualize the situations before they happen. Whatever mental picture you get, change it, and open yourself to different possibilities. When we do encounter the unexpected, have the courage to examine your own behavior and ask yourself, is this how I would handle this interaction if this person looked like me, or if this person didn't look like me? Make a conscious effort to expose yourself, your friends, and parents to that which is currently unexpected and doesn't need to be. But what does that mean? As parents, who are business owners to hire employees, patronize businesses, and like Vishnu said, vote for candidates who have earned the position and are also challenging the normative to the expected. We now have two entire generations in the world whose first visual image of the United States president is black because of President Obama. It's no longer unexpected for America to have a black president. It's a new normal. So let's try to normalize things by turning the unexpected into the expected. So, what do you say? Should we try that visualization exercise again? Please, close your eyes and take a deep breath. Imagine you're sitting in an assembly for the first day of school and your principal walks in. Picture your Instagram post of a friend congratulating a couple who just adopted a baby. Visualize our state swearing in a new governor. Now, open your eyes and raise your hand if your mental image differs substantially now than it did earlier. So remember, let's commit to visualizing, examining, and normalizing. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So after this presentation, we want you to continue to educate yourself and research more about the Black Lives Matter movement itself. And we want you to start identifying any implicit biases that you may have or any prejudice that you may have by either looking at the actions you take every day and the decisions you make, or by taking the implicit association test. Now, by August 23rd, or around the time when school begins to reopen, hopefully, we want you to have a plan of action. This means being able to know how you're going to counter your implicit biases and knowing how you can make the decisions that you want to make. In addition, we want you to continue participating in the movement and changing the environment that you're in, either by educating others or by talking with your family or watching the news with your family. Now, as the year comes to a close, our date is December 20th. We want you to start reflecting on how your mindset has changed since the beginning of this process. And we want you to also see how the changes that you've made help you connect with more people or make decisions that have benefited you in another way. So some tips to get you started are, when mentioning Black people, you should use a capital B to refer to the group of people rather than just the adjective, and it's just a sign of respect. In addition, when referring to slaves, use enslaved people. And when categorizing, don't use color to categorize good and bad. And finally, as Shiva said, start turning the unexpected into the expected. And this is along the lines of getting to interact with the things you're uncomfortable with in order to make them more comfortable. Thank you.
So what I want everybody to do, if you can, is to notice, yes, I may have a bias inside of me. Yes, I may look at that person and say, oh yes, they're wearing a yarmulke. They're probably Jewish. That's a safe assumption, but it might not be so. They might not actually be Jewish. Oh yes, that person's wearing a short-sleeved white shirt. Are they Mormon? I don't know. They could be. But does that mean you know everything about them? Does that mean you know whether or not they love their family, whether or not they're a good person? You don't know anything. But if you look at them and you say, oh, I know it all, I don't want to talk to them, you might never have the chance to know who they are. And that might really suck for you. That's as clear as I can make it. And what I want everybody to encourage you to do is, we have this conflict in the Middle East. We have it at home. We have it all over the place. And if you can say, yes, I'm biased, but I'm going to choose to ignore it and I'm going to talk to them anyway. I'm not going to care. I'm going to find out who these people actually are. before I choose whether or not I dislike them or like them, then maybe we can work our way towards a global community that can actually get along with one another.
And they're very informative. And if you would like to learn more about a specific topic, you can just click on the link, the yellow link. For example, we'd like to know more about systematic racism. Just click the yellow link and you can learn much more information, which we didn't get to discuss in this presentation. And it's very informative and it's really great. Next slide.
So we will now be opening our question and answer page. You can send in your questions through chat and we will answer them the best as we can.
Go ahead and start asking some questions.
Yes. So does anyone have a question that they would like answered?
So I saw a question above, like at first, if you guys want to go to that. I don't remember who said that, but.
Okay, so we have a question. Yes, as we can see in chat, Mr. Thomas is not here right now. He is trying to join back. So we can ask, he can address this question once he gets back on. But if anyone else has any questions that we can answer, please do ask. We have done a lot of research on this.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was appropriate for me to just come off of mute, so is now a good time for me to share my thoughts?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think thanks. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so you know, it's important to really understand that the premise of that question is just wrong in itself. I mean, an entire community of people cannot be labeled as any one, characteristics, whether it relates to working style or values. It's unfair to label any community in that kind of a way, and so the same thing goes for this. And I think any time that anyone wants to make a claim that a community or a group of people, maybe has lazier habits or working style, is just again a flawed question in itself. Now that being stated, for people who do have that way of thinking, I guess it's important to reground ourselves in, again, the history of how we got to this point as a country, specifically for the Black community. And so, it's important to note that we come from a world, most of us, this is an assumption, but most of us come from a world in a community where we see our elder siblings going to finishing high school and going to college and beyond. It is normal for the folks that are around us to be achieving high academic goals. This is what we see around us. So we are naturally, motivated to pursue these kinds of paths because this is what we're surrounded by in our community, and it's also because we had a choice to do that. For disenfranchised communities in this country, specifically the Black community, they did not. It is not a norm for a lot of communities to see strong academic achievement or financial management. That's just not a norm of the world that that many folks have grown up in. When I think about my own students, I was a middle school teacher. Most of my students' parents may or may not have even finished high school. So when we talk about people and their desire to work or excel in terms of academics, we have to remember that we are only the way we are because of the community and the folks who raised us and the people who we saw. But remember, for hundreds of years, the Black community was not even afforded the opportunity to get an education. Even when they did, they were not given the same amount of resources and opportunities. So again, it's important to remember anytime we're thinking about this, that this is the result of hundreds of years of oppression, and that therefore a community as a whole cannot be considered lazy. But it's also worth noting that, again, think about where we are all starting from. And hopefully that answer is a good answer and can kind of suffice. I see there's some other questions, but I don't want to dominate the talking time here. And I'm not, by no means the expert.
Thank you. That was a very nice response. So we have another question, and I think youth can take this one. Do you face any type of racism at school? So does anyone from youth want to speak about that?
Sure. Okay. So regarding racism itself, I believe racism is a very strong term. You know, it's pure hatred, and it still exists. However, you know, I live in Montgomery County, and Montgomery County is one of the most diverse counties in the whole nation. And our success rate for all races are very high. And I'm glad that it is for that. So I don't really see a lot of racism. However, you can experience implicit bias or unconscious bias on a daily basis. You know, like people have that mindset, like saying, okay, he is an Indian person. Like for a white person, say he's an Indian person, I should hang out with the white people. Indians should stay with the Indians. It's not that they hate us, but they still have that bias towards Indians, or whether it's towards Hispanic people or, you know, African people. There's a lot of bias, though, however, unfortunately. And Purnima, do you want to continue, or Gia, do you want to continue on my talk?
Of course, yeah, I can add on to that. So personally in school, I haven't faced much that I can remember off the top of my head, but I know that outside of school, such as in public, like when I'm at the grocery store or even when I'm just driving, I've seen people look at me weirdly or call me weird names that is racist. So even though we do live in a very diverse area and everyone around me is very diverse, I still face a lot of racism, and that's just like a daily thing now.
Okay, so I go to a school where it's predominantly white, and so it is kind of like a thing where the students like to use an Indian accent when they're talking. They think that it makes them funnier, and it's like little things like that. Or some of the Indian students, I haven't really faced racism against most of the students. Like I haven't really faced it personally, but I know people who have. And they make jokes about IT and Indians, like correlating with it. So in that way, I guess, I know people who have faced racism at my school, but I personally haven't really been like a victim of it at school.
I also would like to add on to what Gia, Purnima, and Ryan said. Personally, I haven't experienced racism. I think racism, at least for our school, originates from the stereotypes that they know of. And so when they think of the stereotypes, they immediately come up to me or like some other person, and then they explain the stereotype, and then we have to correct them. So it's not, we don't face racism. It's the fact that we faced racism in a different way compared to the African Americans in our schools.
Okay, there's another question. Does anyone want to answer that? Okay, so the question is, the quote unquote, do you think parents trying to change school district zones is related to white flight? And how can we teach the Indian community that it's okay for their kids to interact with African/Hispanic children, and and it will not have a negative impact on their education? So for the first question, school district zones, we actually learned this, you know, in 9th grade. If you take AP Government and Politics, it's called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering was actually a form of segregation where predominant white senators would try to put all the African people in one district and all the Caucasian males, white people, in one district so that they would win the re-election. And it's called gerrymandering, and it is officially illegal. Does anyone want to take up the second question?
I can go upon that. So with the question asking how can we teach our Indian community that's okay for kids to interact with other races, I think again we should just I think the first step is to take the mentality out of our head, like any of our like unconscious biases we have, because like I think this type of like the fear of interacting with other races or other racial groups comes from the fear of like assumptions that make us like have a little bit of fear in our head. But the very last video that we saw about that man explaining, you don't even know the person, you don't know how they're like, so why make assumptions or why jump to conclusions before you've even gotten to know them? And just making an effort to be acceptive of all racial groups and all types of people will help. And I think in my school specifically, I think since we're so like diverse, it's very inclusive, and I can see that like a lot of times that people are very acceptive, and I can see progress in that they're starting to like have a lot of like acceptance of different racial groups, and we all get to know each other for who we are and not based on stigmas we have in our head. So yeah, whatever anyone want to add on to that?
I think we're good on that question for now. We have a couple more questions. So we have, what is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? I can take this question. So there is a very fine line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, but it generally depends on whether you're respecting and understanding what the culture is, whereas you may be using it for your own agenda. Such as if you take traditional Indian outfits and turn it sexy for a Halloween costume, that's appropriation. Or if you take a religious figure that is native to India and then you use it in a different way for your own agenda instead of really appreciating and getting to understand the culture and respecting it. So it's a very fine line, and it sometimes can be blurry, but it depends on if the culture is being respected or not. Another question we have is, what is the difference of being anti-racist and just not being racist? Would anyone like to take this? I can
Okay,
take
well,
this one
not
too.
being racist.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so not
Go
being
ahead.
racist is just not being racist, and then being anti-racist is being against it and making sure the people around you aren't. Like, it's not only about you, it's about your peers as well. So make sure that it's like a common effort
Yeah.
of you telling people like that is not okay to say. Even if you didn't mean to be racist, you were. So you have to go out of your way and say like that's not okay to say. You can't say that. If that makes sense.
Okay. So we have another question. This question's the way this one says, what will you tell your younger siblings or friends on how to tackle any type of discrimination or racism at school? Well, actually, I am the youngest, so does anyone have any younger siblings?
I would say be upfront, because I can see when Kunyi is with his friends and he'll be joking around and making jokes about like Indian people, and I'm just like, you can't say that. That's not okay. So I think it's just be aware of what you're saying and what you're doing, and it might be disrespectful towards your own culture, and that's not okay.
So I'd like to add on to what Gia says, because I have an 8-year-old sister, and so she's not at the age that she's making all like any remarks like that. But when she's probably older, I would personally say I would correct her, because that's not the way you should grow up. You shouldn't have any discrimination placed upon you, or you should not put like discrimination on someone else. That's not how you should live your life.
All right, thank you for that response. So another great question we got is, how do we get people to understand that this is not a political issue?
It's a human rights issue. It's not a political issue. It has nothing to do with government. It's just about how you treat an everyday person. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is.
So there's another question.
Yes.
And there's actually two questions regarding, people associating, taking advantage of the protests. And actually, this was, a lot of people think that African Americans are taking advantage of the protests, but most of these groups that are taking advantage of these protests are actually from white supremacy groups. And Gia knows a lot about that, so she can add on that.
There have actually been like videos and information of people like stealing like big amounts of merchandise from stores, and even like there were cops. I saw this one video of cops literally just taking out as many things as they could and just placing them into their trunks of their cars. And I was just like, you're supposed to be protecting the community, not harming it. But that's just an example of it.
Any other questions?
So I actually see a question about what is your opinion about taking down statues, which is some recent events that we've seen. So would anyone like to take this?
Link to the Confederacy. Okay, yeah. I think I'm pro taking down the statues.
Yeah, like demolishing and vandalizing
My
the
school
statues.
mascot is a raider, and that was actually a symbol for the Confederacy, I believe, and it was a part of it. And our school is actually trying to make reparations for that because it does make
Personally, for me as well. Thank you, Gia. And I know personally, taking down these statues don't represent anything good. While they are historic, they don't showcase a good part of history. It's something that we don't want to be reminded of a lot. So we would rather have positive statues instead, such as people who were former slaves who actually, for example, there's this woman who was a former slave and she actually dressed up as a man to help go fight in the Civil War. Like, positive statues are much better than, all these Confederate statues, which everyone is constantly seeing.
So I'd like to
Are there
add,
any more questions, or is that all for now?
I'd like to add off of what Purnima said. Like, I also think that some of these statues should be taken down. Like, a recent statue that's become under fire is a Lincoln statue with a slave kneeling at his feet. And like, I know Abraham Lincoln, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation and like he freed the slaves, but the way that the statue is portrayed with a Black person at his feet, that's not like, that perpetuates hate. Like, that's not what we want to show with the statue. So like, we need to rebuild the statue with something more positive. So.
Thank you. We got another question. What is the difference between discrimination and racism? Would someone like to take that?
Racism is more specific because racism is on their racial, like on their racial background, while discrimination is a very big topic.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, discrimination, it can be like that. Discrimination can be for like anything. It's like, it's mainly used in the context of like racial groups, but I think you can say like, oh, this, like Varsha said, in implicit bias, like there are some forms of discrimination that are like shown because of age, because of if you did something good or bad. So I think discrimination is a broader term, but racism really like focuses on like, it's like, oh, you're being like racist to like this racial group because of how they are, or like because of like the color of their skin or just their racial group in general.
All right, thank you. I think that's the end of how many questions we will be taking. Thank you everyone for joining us. We had a lot of really good comments. And remember, this is just the beginning of the discussion. So we will be sharing our slides so you can go in and you can read them whenever you want, and you can go in and actually access the links and the videos that we used today. So again, remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. This topic is much deeper than what we have just covered, and we urge you to look more into it and do your own research as well. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Oh, sorry. On behalf of the KCS Youth team, thank you so much everyone for attending our seminar and taking the time out of your day to learn about this topic that is so important to our society at this time. We hope this presentation was helpful and time-worthy for you. We also hope you applied what you learned in the seminar in your daily life by not singling out someone based on their appearance or race and taking personal action to develop a better environment for the marginalized. Remember to visualize, examine, and normalize. If you have any feedback or questions, make sure to send them to youth@kcsmw.org and follow our Instagram @kcs.youth.club for information on future events. Thank you and have a good night.